Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel about the investment trends for Data-Centric AI. I am Gonçalo, co-founder and CEO at YData, the Data-Centric AI workbench for data scientists, and I'm going to be the host of this panel. With me, I have four amazing guests, Frank, James, Asaf, and Mazamba. Let's get to know them. Frank, care to start?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my name is Frank Chang. I am a general partner at a Seattle-based seed stage venture capital firm called Flying Fish, and we invest in early stage AI and machine learning companies.
Right. Let's continue with James.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. My name is James Alcorn. I'm a partner at Zeta Venture Partners, and Zeta is a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital firm focused exclusively on applied machine learning companies, MLOps, and data infrastructure.
All right. More on the corporate side with Asaf.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. So I'm an investor at Intel Capital, focusing data analytics and machine learning investment, mainly around horizontal platform and application. And before Intel Capital, I was a software engineer in the Intel AI team, leading multiple machine learning projects to reduce costs, increase revenue, accelerate processes, and improve products.
All right. Last but not the least, Mazamba.
Hello, everyone. My name is Masamba. I'm an investor at MMC Ventures. We are a London-based VC fund, been around for about 20 years, and quite heavily focused on applications of data within the enterprise, so a lot of verticalized machine learning, and we do a lot of cloud and data infrastructure as well.
All right, perfect. So to kickstart this session, my first questions are really about the topic of this summit, data-centric AI. Is this a real trend? Are you considering investments in this space, or is this just a buzzword that indicates something else? And do you want to pick on this one first, Frank?
Sure. First of all, I think anyone who's been doing AI or machine learning for any amount of time, I think fully understands that the data that you put into your models is critical. I mean, there's a simple phrase, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Garbage can be defined in lots of different ways. But at the end of the day, if you have, bad data, whether it's just because it's tagged incorrectly or, the labels are wrong or whatever, or the source of itself is bad, you're gonna have a bad model. And so while there are occasionally, big improvements in algorithms and techniques and ways of building models. At the core of it, if no matter how good the algorithm is, no matter how good the technique, if the data is bad, it's not going to be a good result. So I don't think it is a hype or anything like that. I think it is a real thing, so I'll leave it at that.
And I continue on that one, James?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Frank said. I think the underlying premise around data-centric AI has actually always been true since the advent of deep learning back in 2012 and 13. But I think one of the reasons why it's coming to prominence now is because of a shift in the incentives in the academic community. Because I think for the past 10 years, researchers have been rewarded more for innovating on new model architectures as opposed to doing interesting things around data curation. And so I think naturally that impacted what was going on in an industry by companies trying to go to market with new model architectures as opposed to taking care of what's going on with the data. But I think that is changing now. And I think, data-centric AI is definitely a real and secular trend. Because really improvements in model performance that are attributable to new architectural choices are plateauing. So naturally the focus shifts to the data.
I want to add on top of my two colleagues. I think that, it's a real trend, but it's not new trend. I think that we can see it in many new terms, like data science is a new term, big data is a new term. Does it mean that focusing data wasn't an issue? It was always an issue in machine learning, in traditional machine learning. If you look in the start of machine learning 50 years ago and before deep learning came a decade ago, actually a machine learning practitioner spent most of his time dealing with data, either cleaning it or creating features, extracting features, selecting features. So it was highly important to have a curated data set, and that's what actually influenced your model. Like Frank mentioned, garbage in, garbage out. That's a garbage in, garbage out. And when deep learning came on, it just was a brute force. And for a decade, we could live with it. But right now, when it's not a plateau, but in some domains, like there is more maturity, and then if we want to squeeze more from the model itself, we got to go back to basics. So data-centric AI was here for ages, like data science was before the term data science, like distributed computing was before big data, and I think is here to stay. But in addition, you ask another question regarding is it considering an investment in this space, and I think that we need to take into consideration that data is centric or data cleaning and manipulation is only one stage in the end-to-end machine learning pipeline. It's essential, but I believe it's one building block, and customers are looking to focus on capabilities that include this building block, but include other building blocks as well. So it's definitely a must-have, but is it sufficient? I don't think it's sufficient for an investment.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to everything that has been said, for us, we kind of take a step out and see machine learning, see applications of deep learning penetrating all walks of life, from kind of AVs and self-driving cars to things like early cancer detection systems, and some of these are critical, some of these are kind of life and death, and so considering model performance and considering accuracy in some of these models is again, kind of something that is life and death, something that is mission critical, which places greater emphasis on us, as investors and, on people who are building these applications to deliver higher quality data, assuming that this is a representation of the knowledge of the model itself. And so I think it has been a trend and will continue to be an important trend in considering the kind of penetration of machine learning into real life.
I'll just add, so can I just add one thing, which is, I think what happens often is when there's some big new technique like deep learning or reinforcement learning or CNNs for computer vision or whatever it might be, that grabs headlines and that seems like sexy and cool and people want to talk about that. But no one really talks about the data, because it's always this baseline thing that you always have to worry about, but it doesn't really make headlines to talk about data, right? Because I think people who are in the industry realize that, that's a baseline thing. I think that might be one of the reasons why people, there's a big splash around some new thing, but people forget that at the heart of it, it's all about the data.
Maybe to pick up on a point, Asaf, you made, which I think is a good one. You mentioned that, the enterprise demand is really for more end-to-end ML type platforms and infrastructure. And I think that's certainly true for the enterprise market and maybe the top end of the enterprise market. I wonder, though, if you think that there's a segment of the buyers who are willing to adopt this kind of best of breed, I don't want to use the word point solution, but best of breed tools that are focused on a specific part of the MLOps tool chain, be it a feature store, or be it synthetic data, or be it model deployment. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that it's a platform play. I'm not sure it's one platform. And when we say end-to-end, I think there is room for several platforms. If we distinguish my point, as I say it, there is definitely one platform from production. And this is a bit different community around production and deployment and monitoring. That's not the regular data scientist. So we might see one there. And in the area of exploration and training, we might see 1 to 2 platforms. I can think of one platform for data And that's all around the data management and the metadata around the data and synthesized data and labeling data and so on. And the second one around training and exploration, like managing all the exploration, analysis of all the exploration. So I think that we also may see an end-to-end platform, but for specific domains. Like, for example, if you take only vision, or only search, like vector search, that might be an area that it's worth investing in really end-to-end platform. It's a good question regarding the feature. Like, there are definitely companies that will buy feature and buy each feature and consolidate it to one platform. Companies that have a lot of engineering effort to do that. But I don't think that's the majority in the long tail.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment that you make there, because we've been having this debate internally as well, in kind of considering different investments in the space and whether we want to back something that is going end to end across the pipeline, as opposed to kind of point solutions that are kind of very verticalized, very niche and specific to like one particular function within the ML pipeline, and kind of having that jack of all trades versus, kind of like a master of none debate internally. What we found is even with some of the companies who are building, specific niche tools, be it in, data curation or again, synthetic data, or like something within kind of monitoring, many of them are looking to go up and then across. Many of them are looking to start within one vertical and then kind of build out their offering to become that platform. And so I agree with you. We kind of see it even when people are starting with one particular niche, and are doing so to get to some level of product market fit and then kind of expand their offering. So yeah, we've kind of seen that in the way that people are building their products out, their go-to-market.
Interesting. So something that it seems that all of you agree is that we are far from consolidation in this space when it comes to data science tooling, and there's not exactly a market leader, with the exception of some open source tooling like Jupyter Notebooks or using Pandas and so on. So what are your thoughts on what to expect in this space, and where are you placing your bets? So you mentioned these verticalized solutions, or it is a platform play, but is there something tooling emerging to kind of fulfill these segments? So where will be you placing your bets, let's say? You want to start on that one, Asaf?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with it. We have a saying that developers are from Mars and data science are from Venus, and they are different, have different culture, and they work differently, and different things drive them. Both are care a lot about open source, but again, I think we are starting from the area that we think that it's easier to sell a bit and build a business. That's the main question. Where right now it's easier to build a business and have a 5-6 digit sales. And when we look on the entire pipeline, we think that it's either in the production side. So when you have a company that already have several models in production, understand this complexity and need a solution. So those are maybe the people outside the club, the ones that do exploration and haven't committed. This is a huge community, but they're not necessarily committed to pay. And the one in production is smaller, but they're already committed. So we prefer to go right now with the communities that already committed to machine learning and are willing to pay, understand the problems. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of our approach in different areas of interest, you kind of see a number of trends in play, namely around kind of data collaboration and opening up data ecosystems, for example, and enabling the enterprise to innovate with the stores of data that it has and being able to quickly and efficiently grant the right people access, I suppose. And that's a key area of interest for us. And moving forward, I think will continue to be just in the way that people are able to rapidly move forward. So particularly at the enterprise level, I think that's a pain point that we continue to see over and over again. And then kind of across the pipeline and across kind of the development cycle as well, there are other areas where kind of noticing more activity and diving into the rise of the analytics engineer, for example, and the waves that we've seen DBT make. That's been of particular interest recently to us, as well as looking at this next generation of kind of the output layer as well, looking at this next generation of what analytics actually looks like. And similar to Asaf's point, how you can pull in other stakeholders around the business to be able to use some of these tools as well, but making sure you're starting with some of the people who are most bought in, some of the people who are using these tools on a day-to-day basis to provide kind of output to the teams around different areas of the enterprise. So yeah, kind of looking at BI 4.0, for example. But yeah, from our perspective, those are some of the areas that we're digging. Those are some of the interesting trends that we've noticed, amongst others as well. But yeah, they're relatively high on our priority list right now, and we're seeing a good deal of activity there.
I'd say, in my experience, so just a little background, I spent a bunch of time at Microsoft in my prior life, almost 17 years, and then also at Amazon. And what I noticed, in the early days, I guess when we were working on speech recognition, a company like Microsoft has the money and the tools to attract PhD, ML researchers and data scientists from everywhere. And so they basically turned into this giant black hole where like they got all the best resources. And then they built their entire system end to end. And it was only for them. They didn't release that, on Azure or anything like that. It was just an internal system. Very few companies on the planet have the ability to build such systems, like, Intel, Google, Apple, Amazon, that's probably it, Facebook. And so because it's not just a money problem, it's also attracting the talent. And so what we've seen is like, okay, if you're Walmart and you want to try and compete with Amazon and you want to build your own team in-house, good luck getting, the Stanford PhD to go to Walmart. Right? They want to go to Google or Facebook or whatever. And so what we're seeing now, a couple decades later, date myself, is that there's this trend towards democratizing AI for the masses, so to speak. Right? It's the non-tech first companies are also very, very interested in using ML and in being data centric and trying to run their business differently. And all the tools that you guys just mentioned and all the trends that you guys are seeing, I think are in aid of bringing this capability to enterprises and SMBs that don't have the wherewithal to bring a team in-house and build it all locally.
Frank, just out of curiosity, related to the talent point as well, I imagine today big tech is still a massive magnet for technical talent all over the world, right? But there's also a lot more knowledge about startups that is kind of tooling out there. It's easier to go out there and start something on your own, kind of based on your own talents and the talents of those around you. Do you think the same still rings true today, or are you seeing kind of flows of talent move elsewhere just because of the kind of easier capabilities in terms of being able to build something yourself?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on what the macro economic environment is like. I would say back before sort of today, in the last 6 months, what we were seeing is a lot of people definitely a little bit braver and willing to go out on their own and try and make it themselves. We definitely see people clam up a little bit when they're worried about the economic environment and whether or not they're going to survive. These are smart people who understand the probability of success, right? And smart people also realize that if you're the top talent, then you can strike out on your own. But then if something doesn't go well, you can always go back to a big five job and be perfectly safe there. And so we see sort of lumpiness based on sort of what's going on in the larger economy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I suppose it's all a kind of risk-adjusted decision that you have to make.
Exactly.
What about you, James? Where are you placing your bets?
Well, I guess to draw some comments more broadly about the market, I think two things are definitely true. One is that a lot of these kind of new entrants to the MLOps toolchain all have ambitions to expand into other parts of it. As Masamba said before, I think that's very, very true. Like every company that I meet in and around that space has ambitions to become a platform serving many different jobs along that tool chain. And I think the other thing that's true is that there is going to be consolidation because right now it's like really a Cambrian explosion and a tool sprawl, and the history of markets shows us that over time, I think we can expect consolidation in the MLOps category. So, but I mean, our view has been to focus on parts of that tool chain where we are seeing enterprise buyers who have willingness to buy kind of best of breed solutions that are serving one specific point. And so that's translated into investments in synthetic data companies and in feature store companies and in vector databases and things like that. I think we'll continue to kind of take a first principles approach to understanding which of these businesses really have a chance to build a large, strong, independent business by initially serving kind of one part of that tool chain. But yeah, I think it's inevitable that consolidation will come.
Right. I have a follow-on question, actually based on several of your comments. So it seems that we are a bit more consolidated in what it comes to MLOps, so deploying models, training models, monitor those models. But now with this, keyword data-centric AI, putting the importance in the data again, and taking an expression that Masamba said, looking at BI 4.0. So does this mean that we're consolidating in the downstream, but now we are seeing a lot of problems in what it comes to actually wrangle the data and prepare the data, and we are looking to this space right now? What are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing companies emerging now in the upstream, like going from analytics to data science, helping bridging this gap? Is this the problem, and this is what is emerging?
If I can relate to what Frank and Masamba said before around democratization and BI, I think the MLOps is more of a platform that helps you run your either experiments or your production, but there is another layer on top of it, which is the automation of AI. And we need to do some automation for different communities, and Frank mentioned the software engineers, and Andre Karpathy said AI software 2.0 is just another way to write software. A software engineer will use AI, so we need to give them tools. And as well, data analysts, they need to use AI as well, and like BI. Automate the BI by using AI instead of analysts come and do a manual check in the data. He can get the most interesting things, or the event and the most influential factors, and go and fix the business instead of looking for the root cause. Because that's what's great with AI. So I think that this democratization will happen from different communities and in different vertical. And actually, if in the MLOps we have a lot of companies and they're all competing with one another, I think in the layers on top, you can have many companies and each one will serve a specific domain or specific customer or specific data type, and they have enough space to grow.
Yeah, just on the point of kind of this democratization of AI, of machine learning, of kind of these intelligent software applications. I think we're definitely seeing it coming kind of from the top down, so from the output layer down as well. We're seeing it with incumbents as well as with challengers in the market. So you kind of have existing players. You have players that have been around for years, companies like Click, for example, who are kind of integrating machine learning into every part of their platform to be able to almost help you more easily draw the conclusion, but to be able to do so in querying your data and like using NLP as opposed to having to go through each data point or having to find out where your answer is. So letting the platform itself find the answer for you based on some simpler form of input. We're kind of seeing that this new generation as well, people who are kind of allowing the business user, the kind of data analysts or business analysts go in, manipulate information, and draw insight from that and try and do so automatically through kind of embedded natures. So I do think it's going to be a trend that continues, and one that makes sense in terms of removing these bottlenecks around like data teams internally in some of these larger organizations. So yeah, just to add on to Asaf's comment there.
Yeah, the BIE who could like run the SQL query was like gold in my previous teams, right? Like everybody wanted something from that person because, they needed some trend or some data or some analysis, and they were the bottleneck. And it's really hard to find those people. And now it's really hard to find, data scientists to basically run that same function. And so to be able to make it so that the non-technical, biz dev person or marketing person can pull the insights they need out of the data and out of the models, that's really critical. And that's a trend that we're seeing lots of companies try and tackle.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
All right. Another comment that you made during this question was then the open source tooling and that data scientists are from Venus. And we know that data scientists love open source. And during this summit, we are seeing a lot of startups that are open source, showcasing their tooling and so on. So my question for you is actually pretty simple. How do VCs feel about open source companies? You want to pick on that one, James?
Sure. I'm not sure I can speak for all of VCs, but I think in some cases have a strong preference for businesses that go to market in an open source or open core approach. But I think it depends on the user personas, and it depends on the use case, and it depends on the way that you want to insert your technology into a broader stack. So I don't want to make a generalization, but based on our track record, like we've invested in a lot of open source or open core businesses. I think one thing that is, if it isn't changing now, it certainly will change, is the way that investors think about understanding open source traction, to date has been very, very focused on what I would call like vanity metrics. Things like GitHub stars and these kind of high level engagement metrics across the various open source communities that don't always correlate strongly with like actual enterprise deployments. And my guess is that the investor community is kind of coming around to this, second order understanding of the levers of a thriving open source community, and not necessarily like how many GitHub stars you have. So I think that's one thing that will change if it isn't changing already.
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, look, at the end of the day, the VC's job is to return provide a return on investment to their LPs, right? And so, I like that term, vanity metrics. I think you're right that you don't want to focus on those. You want to make sure that while open source is a great way to get eyeballs, to use another vanity metric, maybe an outdated one, and get usage and get mind share and all the rest of it. But that has to translate into something monetizable, right? And there are plenty of examples out there of companies that have done that, right? Like Red Hat, Databricks, you name it. There are companies that have become billion-dollar companies that started in open source, but they've found a way to monetize, some services, some special features, guarantees, on performance, uptime, things like that. And so I think as long as you have that mindset and you have the ultimate, plan and goal and roadmap to get to, revenue and profitability, then we've got no issues with open source. But open source, just for the sake of being a cool science project, is something that we obviously shy away from. So
I think maybe to add on some more, I think like in theory, open source can be a great distribution channel. And that's certainly the businesses that I've been lucky enough to be involved with, the ones that have done it well, have used it really as a distribution channel for some, hosted SaaS product or hosted kind of compute around the open source offering. But yeah, it's certainly not. It's not necessary, nor is it sufficient to build a great business in any of these categories.
Yeah, I agree with my two colleagues. I think open source is not a goal. It's a tool that helps you. And by the way, when we talk about open source, I think some of them are around building community, and with this community driving the business. But some open source are highly complex, like for example, reinforcement learning library. And like you create it, how many people in the world will be able to use reinforcement learning for highly limited amount? How many will be able to donate contribution to reinforcement learning, even smaller than that? So there are complex open source projects that are more like a proof point that something is feasible than building a community around it. And that's fine. A company still have an open source, they still support it, but the product itself is evolving on top of what they learn from the open source itself.
Yeah, and I think the point of kind of product evolution is one that we emphasize quite a lot here at MMC as well. And kind of looking at the community that you build, you treat them not only as kind of advocates, but early contributors to your product and product roadmap as well. Like the kind of people who are most plugged in, who have the biggest need, are helping you to decide, which features to build out, what to prioritize. And so we see kind of open source companies and the communities that they build around them is really important from that perspective. But then, the key question that we're always asking ourselves is, what's the bridge? What is kind of the bridge in value in terms of what you're providing free to your community versus what they're going to pay for? And how do you measure that willingness to pay? I think having kind of clear hypotheses that you're going to test around that and doing so actively is one thing that we look at when we're looking at companies, particularly at Series A. Perhaps when we look at companies that are slightly earlier stage, then there's less pressure for them to do that immediately, but it's something that they should be thinking about at that point in time.
I want to mention another thing, that open source is as well a risk, and people need to remember that, especially very early, that some big company can take your open source and offer it as a service, and we've seen it in our company. So you need to have a mechanism to defend your valuable assets as well in the open source.
Fair point, very fair point. And my follow-up question is that there's a market metric saying that the data science or AI companies take longer in going to market, and when talking about open source companies, probably even more. So we are seeing these startups taking longer to generate revenue. And what is your perspective on this, comparing to, let's say, traditional SaaS companies that can generate revenue right away and change the product, iterate, launch new versions very fast, while data science or AI companies don't? Do you see something different on the metrics, on the time they take to generate revenue, going to market, and what are your thoughts on that? Do you wanna start on this one, Asaf?
Yes. So I think in general, it's depend. If you're an AI company that actually develops platform for the AI market, for builders of AI solution, yeah, that's taking more time, because AI and the usage of deep learning in production is, I think for me at least, is a bit slower than what I thought it will be 7-8 years ago. I thought that by now there will be way more adoption. So in the platform area, yes, it's going slower. But if you talk about climbing the value chain of a customer and building a product where your competitive advantage is some kind of an algorithm, I think that this is not different than any software product companies, any SaaS companies.
Yeah, I think here and there we see longer gestation periods, particularly for some of the more kind of like verticalized machine learning companies that we back, who are kind of delivering the models themselves as opposed to delivering some tooling. And so for them, quite often it's like constant iteration on the models that they're developing, trying to bump up accuracy as high as they can, trying to bump up performance as high as they can. But to us, we see that as a worthy investment. I mean, we see a lot of that work going into the defensibility of the company in the long run as well. Again, a lot of that going back to the data that they're using and kind of how they're thinking about constant iteration. And so, yeah, I think from our perspective, we do see longer gestation periods, but there are a number of investors in the market who kind of understand that and take on that risk and have kind of like built up their funds and their models to be able to kind of ride that out as well, assuming that you'll reach a certain point where you've built up enough value to be able to significantly accelerate.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it does take a knowledgeable investor to have the patience and understanding that it's not like traditional software, where if there's a bug, you fix the code and you deploy it, and tomorrow the bug is gone. It's like, oh, I need 100,000 more data points on this particular scenario to retrain my model, and that's going to take time. And then I got to tweak things, and I got to pick different, whatever. And so, just understanding that flow, I think is really important because you can be easily impatient and dismiss a company that could be, huge. So you just need to have that understanding. And there are different metrics you can use. It's not all just revenue. Obviously, that's important, and we can talk later about sort of like the macroeconomics and the importance of demonstrating that revenue to get follow-on investments. But at least initially, I think having that understanding is key.
Anything to add, James?
No, it was well said by my colleagues.
Right. All right. Well, Frank, you touched the macroeconomics point. That leads me to my next question. We have a lot of founders watching you at the moment. So looking at the macroeconomic scenario, it's not the best right now, and many tech startups are doing layoffs. Does this mean that the next couple of years or the next year will be in survival mode, or is there still money available to raise? Or if so, what's changed?
Yeah, so I think, the macroeconomics situation is not pretty. I don't think anybody really knows when we're going to get out of it. I've seen anywhere as short as 6 months and as long as 2 years, but the truth is nobody knows. The economics of VC are interesting, right? I think if you're a really large VC firm that has bets in all stages, especially late stage, you're a little bit panicked right now because basically the only exit for your really late stage companies is IPO. And no one's IPOing right now. Everyone's going to hold for at least 6 to 12 months on IPO, which means you're funneling all your available resources into keeping those companies alive until they can IPO, which means you're not making a lot of other bets. But if you're a smaller focused firm on, let's say, early stage, you have a certain window in which you have to deploy your capital. So normally your deployment period is 3 to 4 years. And so you're not going to make investments. You're going to look for deals. What's going to change is you can be pickier about your deals, and the deal terms will be more in the favor of the investor. And so it doesn't mean that deals aren't happening. It means the dynamics have changed, and it means that deals are not getting done just on promises. They're getting done on proof. So the more proof points you can come up with, whether that's revenue or users or POCs or whatever your metric is, if you can show consistent growth, that's going to be key because investors are looking for those proof points.
Just to add on to Frank's comment there with regards to some of the pressures on deployment, I think another kind of interesting input here is also the LP market, the state of those who are investing into the private funds. I think looking back over the past few years, maybe the past 2 or 3 years, I would say LPs seem to have kind of overcommitted to private capital, and we're seeing a bit of a pullback now as well, or at least a slowdown. I'm not sure if it's materializing in the same way for my colleagues in the US as it is for us in Europe here. But yeah, I think I'm speaking to more and more kind of fund operators, speaking to more and more people out of the funds who are noticing the same kind of slowdown in appetite to invest into new funds. And so I think that kind of plays a part in terms of slowing down the pace of deployment. And we're noticing that in competitive processes as well. Now, again, deals are still being done, and a lot of capital is still around some of the highest quality companies. But everyone seems to be taking much longer to do their due diligence. Everyone seems to be, going through these longer decision cycles. And so, yeah, I still think people are deploying capital today. I mean, in terms of MMC, I think we've done about 5 Series A's today since the start of the year. And that's probably what we usually do in a given year. And so there are still people deploying capital. I just think the time in which it takes for them to make their decisions is slightly extended. And there's a bit more of a cautious nature around the market. And again, I think people are emphasizing much more quality of growth as opposed to kind of growing at all costs right now and, burning money everywhere. And so, yeah, a lot more of those efficiency metrics are being brought up earlier in conversations and kind of looking at, how companies are planning to grow from there on out as well. So not just how you've grown to date, but what you're going to do with the capital. And so, planning thoroughly around that and, having a robust model where you have kind of solid assumptions, I'd say, is becoming more and more important. It's not that it wasn't important before, but I think there are definitely more eyeballs on it.
Yeah, I think if we can tie it to the topic of the discussion, data-centric AI, like people going back to data-centric after the brute force, I think as well investment, people going back not only for valuation, but also for the efficiency of the company and how they leverage the money for making revenue. So we're not only looking for company with revenue, but we're looking for company with high efficiency. We're just going back to basic.
Yeah, I think, Zeta's perspective is like, we're seed stage investors. We operate on decade plus timelines from the time at which we invest to the time that, companies exit. So what that means is, we generally don't make drastic changes to our pace of deployment, portfolio construction based on what's going on over a 6-month period in the public markets. So that means that this year it's a normal rate of deployment. And we are investing in, lots of new companies. It also meant that last year we weren't investing in as many companies as some of our peers. So there's kind of two sides to that coin. But in general, yeah, I think, every company is different, but we are still seeing that high quality companies with high quality teams are able to raise sufficient capital. I still think that's true.
All right. So it seems we are running out of time. So I have just one last but quick question to all of you. And if you have one piece of advice for a data or AI startup looking to raise in the next 6 months, 12 months, what that would be? You want to start, James?
One piece of advice. That's a good question. Maybe if one of my colleagues wants to jump in, if they have something on the tip of their tongue.
Yeah, it's hard to relate to specifically to raising money, but I think one advice for AI startup, and it's either you're raising or not, is try to climb the customer value, solve the business problem, understand that your AI model is just one component and you need to solve his problem and probably complement it with additional technique because model doesn't solve everything. So this is something, at least with very highly technical teams, we see a lot that there is extra focus in algorithms and we need to complement that with rule-based other techniques that actually solve the business problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a super important point, and it's true not just for the next year, but for companies at all times. Is like solving a real business need. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, and to add on to that, beyond being able to efficiently communicate, the necessity behind the solution that you're building, really being able to kind of do that storytelling and, communicate across to the investors that you're speaking to, like what is the secret sauce here and what will continue to differentiate this proposition. We've kind of talked to this Cambrian explosion of tools around kind of data science and MLOps. And so with that in mind, telling the story of, what makes your solution kind of proprietary, unique, what is kind of the unique insight that you're able to leverage. I think even in this type of fundraising environment, those messages will continue to land well.
Yeah, I'm just going to add on that. I think you touched on a key statement, which is storytelling. Some of the best pitches and founders that I know are really great storytellers. And so you might be the most technical person in the world and the smartest person in the world in your field. But if you can't convince an investor to invest in your company, it means you probably can't sell either. And so you have to be able to tell that story. But the one piece of advice I would give any founder right now, regardless if they're doing, AI or anything, is be patient. Back to the macro thing. The odds are not in your favor right now to raise. I'm not trying to discourage anybody from going out and building their dream company, but be patient and understand that the earliest money you take is the most expensive money you'll take in terms of dilution. And so just be patient out there, and don't just jump on the first term sheet you get because it will have a downstream impact.
All right. This sums up our panel today. So let's give a big thank you to our panelists. And in case you have follow-up questions, post them on the community Slack so we can back to you. See you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.